Embakasi MP Babu Owino has joined the team Gachagua. Welcome to Kenya Lens Media, where we give you news updates as they break. And kindly, if you are new here, consider subscribing. Now, Embakasi MP Babu Owino has intensified the pressure on police leadership by openly supporting Team Gachagua and opposition team where they are demanding for the resignation of Inspector General Douglas Kanja, escalating a political standoff that now threatens to spill into nationwide protests. Speaking during a press conference on Wednesday, the outspoken legislator declared that the police chief's continued stay in office was untenable and unlawful, aligning himself with the growing opposition campaign led by former Deputy President Rigathi Gachagua. The remarks mark a significant escalation in what is quickly becoming a major confrontation between opposition leaders and the National Police Service. With the demonstrations already announced and the political rhetoric sharpening, the dispute is evolving into a broader debate about police accountability, constitutional authority, and the role of public protests in Kenya's democracy. Owino's statement comes at a moment of heightened political tension following a dramatic scene earlier in the week when opposition figures attempted to confront the police chief at the Jogo House. The visit led to Rigathi Gachagua and supported by allies, including Kalonzo Musyoka, ended without a meeting after the Inspector General was reportedly absent from his office. The failed attempt did not diffuse the situation. Instead, it followed by a public rally in Nairobi Central Business District that was dispersed by the police using tear gas, further inflaming tensions between the opposition and the security agencies. In the aftermath, opposition leaders announced plans for nationwide demonstrations scheduled for the February 20th, signaling that the confrontation is far from over. And during his Wednesday address, Owino delivered one of the strongest political attacks yet on the police leadership. He argued that the Inspector General Douglas Kanja had failed in their core mandate of protecting citizens and therefore should vacate office immediately. The MP framed the issue as both legal and moral, asserting that the police chief's position was no longer defensible. By publicly backing the protest movement, Owino effectively amplified the opposition's campaign and lent it additional political weight. His intervention is significant because it broadens the coalition of voices demanding accountability within the security sector. Analysts note that when prominent legislators join such calls, the political cost for the targeted official often increases. A central theme of Owino's remarks was the legitimacy of street protests. The legislator insisted that demonstrations have historically been powerful mechanism for democratic change in Kenya. He pointed to the country's transition to multi-party democracy as evidence that public pressure has often forced political reforms, and in his view, the planned protests against the police leadership fall within that tradition. This framing reflects a long-standing debate in Kenyan politics about the role of mass action, and supporters of the demonstrations argue they are a constitutional right and an essential check on power, while critics often warn about the risks of instability and economic disruption. The push for Kanja's resignation appears to be part of the broader opposition strategy to spotlight what the leaders describe as failures within the security apparatus. By focusing on this Inspector General, opposition figures are attempting to personalize accountability within the police service. Political observers say the strategy mirrors past moments in Kenyan politics when opposition groups concentrated pressure on specific office holders to force institutional reforms. When the approach will succeed remains uncertain, or rather whether the approach will succeed remains uncertain. Much may depend on the scale of the planned nationwide protests and government's response in the coming days. In addition to targeting the police leadership, Owino also weighed in on the controversial cooperation agreement between Nairobi County and the national government. His comments echoed concerns raised by the critics who argue the deal risks undermining county autonomy. The MP accused Governor Johnson Sakaja of effectively diminishing the county's independence by entering into agreement with the President William Ruto, and according to Owino, the partnership is unlikely to deliver meaningful improvements for residents and instead signals a worrying shift in the balance of power between national and county governments. Governor Sakaja has firmly rejected such claims, maintaining that no county functions have been surrendered and the arrangement is purely collaborative. At the heart of the unfolding dispute is a broader national conversation about policing standards and public trust in law enforcement. Kenya has in recent years witnessed recurring public concern over police conduct, crowd control tactics, and also response to civil unrest. Opposition leaders have increasingly framed these issues as evidence of systematic leadership failures within the police service. By calling for the Inspector General's resignation, they are attempting to convert public frustration into political pressure. Security experts caution, however, that leadership changes alone rarely resolve deep institutional challenges. They note that meaningful reform typically requires sustained policy, legal and operational adjustments across the entire policing system. As of midweek, there has been no indication from the government that it intends to act on the opposition's demands. Historically, Kenyan administrations have been reluctant to remove senior security officials under political pressure alone. The National Police Service has also not publicly conceded in failure that would justify the Inspector General stepping down. This suggests the standoff could harden in the days ahead, particularly if protests proceed as planned. Analysts also warn that the government now faces a delicate balancing act, and that is maintaining law and order while avoiding actions that could further inflame political tensions. Owino's reference to demonstrations as engines of change draws on a well-documented chapter of Kenya's political history. Throughout the late 1980s and early 1990s, sustained public protests played a major role in pushing the country towards multi-party democracy. Since then, the street mobilization has remained a recurring feature of Kenyan politics, used by both opposition and at times political figures who later joined the government. However, the effectiveness of protests has varied widely depending on the political context, public support, and state response. And some movements have produced major reforms, while others have fizzled out or triggered security crackdowns. The current confrontation over police leadership will likely be judged against that historical backdrop. Attention now turns to the planned national demonstrations and whether they will attract significant public participation. The scale of turnout could influence both the political narrative and the government's strategic response. And if protests remain limited, pressure on the police chief may ease, but a larger scale mobilization could intensify calls for their accountability and potentially widen a the political crisis. At the same time, the parallel controversy over Nairobi Cooperation Pact suggests that multiple governance disputes are converging, increasing the overall political temperature. The escalating calls for Inspector General Douglas Kanja's resignation represent more than a routine political dispute. They highlight deeper tensions around police accountability, the right to protest, and the boundaries of executive authority in Kenya's evolving democracy. If opposition pressure succeeds, it could reinforce the power of public mobilization in shaping security leadership. If it fails, it may signal the limits of protest-driven political change in the current environment. For ordinary Kenyans, the immediate concern is whether the unfolding confrontation will lead to improved policing and greater public safety, or instead deepen political polarization and street unrest. As nationwide demonstration loom, the coming days will test not only the resilience of Kenya's security institutions but also the maturity of its democratic culture. The outcome could shape the country's political trajectory well beyond the fate of a single police chief. That is all for today from Kenya Lens Media, and kindly if you are new here or you're meeting this channel for the first time, kindly consider subscribing as a way of motivating us and also helping this platform grow.